Welcome to the 2-Bit Game Club, episode 22B, Civilization from 1991 for the Apple II computer. I'm your host, Liam Gallagher. I'm a composer, bassist, person involved with video games. It's fun stuff. So, this is the second week we're covering Civilization. Before we talked about extrapolation and game design, this week we're talking about the UI of the Civilization game. UI being the user interfaces. Alright, so it's hard to tell what's going on at any given point in a game of Civilization, just because it's such a complicated game system. There's a lot packed into each screen, what we're going to get our information from. But the amount that's packed on each screen is often hard to decipher. And it's always a very small fraction of the information that's actually available on the game's current state. So, as a result, first-time players are going to find themselves pouring through the game's manual in search of some exploration for the game's mechanics, like how to interpret really what's going on in the game in order to make a good choice. So thinking about this game as a player, I'm looking at a map, I'm trying to decide where to found my next city. Alright, I got some fishes on a water tile, that seems like a good spot to found my capital, Liumdium. But it's not really apparent from the UI what the fishes are going to mean for the people of my growing and bustling empire, the Liumopians. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a screen of Civilization and go through what data is available to the player and how that might inform their choices. For this, I'm going to use the screenshot from the Civilization Wikipedia page just because it's easy for everyone to find. It's going to be up on screen as well. So it's from the Amiga version of the game, which was released in 1992, which is a little different than the Apple II one, which is 1991, but I digress. So the UI is how the user interfaces with the computer, which is an experience that should be custom built for each game operation. You can't take UI for granted. We're used to seeing pretty samey looking HUDs in first-person shooters or whatnot, or maybe like a speedometer or a tachometer in the corner of a screen for a racing game. But, games are not really like, say, interfacing with a sandwich, which you pretty much do every time you interface with a sandwich, it goes in your mouth. So, what kind of information the game designers put in the UI for each individual game can tell you a lot about what they think is important, how they want you to interact with it, and what kind of fun they're looking for. So, what do you think, Mr. Meier? Please send your comments to 2bitgameclub.com/Patreon, Mr. Meier, if you have anything that you want to weigh in on what's important and what's fun. But without actually getting an answer back from him, we're going to have to parse it ourselves. So, is the UI for Civilization any good? So, well, I would argue that many aspects of Civilization are very ahead of its time. Its UI is not. A good hint for this would be to take a gander at the following 5 Civilization games and their expansions to take a look at the adjustments that were made to the system's UI. And I think that's a pretty leading example of how some improvements were available. But without further digression, let's really get into it. Okay, so on the top row of the screen, we have menus which promise information and interaction based on the topics of game, orders, advisors, world, and Civilopedia. So right there, alarm bells should already be ringing, given that the first of the game's menus is called game. It's a very meta menu, but the real clue is the advisor menu. On behalf of the designers, there's already an anticipated lack of clarity in the mind of the player built right into the UI. Sends the message, there's too much information to make meaning of, so we need advisors programmed right into this thing. Alright, moving down, there's the mini-map on the top left, which shows a few bits of data about things like the rough geography of the world and how well it's been explored. Below that, we have our sweet palace. We have a panel that looks pretty plain, but it's got a bunch of information about the current selected tile, any units might be on it, as well as details about the city improvements, the terrain improvements, and so forth. The majority of the game screen, of course, is taken up by not the mini map, so the mega map, the macro map, which shows detailed information about terrain, as well as specifics about locations of cities and units, and improvements like roads. Okay, so we've done a grand tour of the main game screen now. Hooray. So despite all this detail, the main game screen features a very small fraction of the information that's available and that you could use to weigh in anytime on a considered choice you would, input in the game of Civilization, be it your path for research or war or economy. Simply put, each play state is comprised of a problem set that which takes as its contents the conditions of every single unit and city, as well as each civilization and all of their parameters, not limited to technological advancement, financial holdings, and economic power. All right, all that data isn't the end of the complexity of Return of Civilization, though. It's all compounded when it comes time to parse what that information actually means for you and your choices. Think about it. What's a unit's movement cost over a tile of jungle? Is that available in the UI? Can a caravan that's on a boat prompt a trade mission the same term it disembarks? Is that available to you? What's the practical impact of choosing to research chemistry for 6 turns instead of industrialization for 8? The answer to these questions and more don't lie on the main game screen, and oftentimes they're not even in one of the many branching submenus that fold out from the main screen, but rather they're in the paper manual. So, in Civilization, the game system willingly provides you with a huge amount of data on every turn that if you really, really wanted to, you could spend a very long time poring over. All right, this game is in no way trying to hide any of this information from you. It's accessible. It's just a question of whether or not you can be bothered to play this fun game so patiently that you would actually be able to get all the super fun submenu graphics and data points compiled so that you could actually make use of them. Have you tried doing this? Do you ever play Civilization in this really meticulous manner? Like, do you enjoy it? Send your thoughts. Patreon.com/DoItGameClub. We answer all these questions and respond to all these comments at the end of each month with a wrap-up episode. So, if you're trying to play Civilization so as to get the absolute most points and win the high score, achieve the stated goal of the game, which is like to be the best that no one ever was, then your best assets are going to be patience, a spreadsheet, and some critical thinking skills. So I asked Sid what his thoughts on the philosophy behind the UI of the game was, but he didn't get back to me on time to do this episode, so we're just going to have to go on a limb here. So I would argue that the philosophy of the UI of Civilization is the game is more fun if you squint at it. All these menus, all this data gives you the impression that you're a informed leader who's powerful, can make really cool choices about the shape of their civilization and its future. But in reality, you're just going to synthesize these things in your brain in a pretty ad hoc fashion that allows you to make use of the UI elements to the extent to which that it actually entertains you. Because if you were to actually go through with all the elements of the UI and take all the data from it and take everything you could learn, this is turn-based. You can spend an infinite amount of time making each individual choice. You're not really left with a game that has play that recognizes or is similar at all to the stated goals of the game. So the game's design is banking on this idea that you'll never actually execute its optimal strategy of parsing and interpreting all the data. So there's a vague sense of a play state is what you need to do some close enough for jazz style judgment calls, which is in the end far more fun. So to be fair, I think bad UI can be a really important part of gameplay. Take the quip I made about having advisors earlier. It's actually kind of cool. And in another sense, it's kind of lame that there needs to be this workaround in order to surmise the gameplay state to give it to you straight. But at the other sense, advisors are the kind of thing that like a real leader would have. They say things like too expensive, and then from there you have created a gameplay moment that is either you feeling smart for taking the wise counsel of your financial expert, or you can have the other twist where you're the brave, charismatic, standing alone leader who's willing to find in the face of political orthodoxy, screaming, "Damn the torpedoes!" as you ride the ship into war. like so much else in games, there's not really an issue of right and wrong here. We're talking about UI. It's context. It's all about the experience you're trying to deliver for players. Either you're getting something out of the game or you're not. Can you think of examples of UI that seem bad on the face of it that actually allowed for cool gameplay moments? I think a really good one would be like Fog of War in the real-time strategy genre, where in a certain sense it's like UI failure because it's the abject absence of information about the gameplay state, but it's that limbo of knowing what's going on in the field of battle that actually makes those pitched battles feel like there's tension in them, that anything can happen at any point in time and you need to be prepared, and the most resourceful commander is the one who will win the day. So, as always, send in your thoughts to patreon.com/2bitgameclub. So, I've been your host, Liam Gallagher. Tune in next time when we're talking about how Civilization, the game, can teach us about civilization, the history. All right, next month's game is going to be Donkey Kong Country from 1994 for the Super Nintendo as well. So, until next time,